The first sign of the end was not a whisper, but a shriek of metal. It was the sound of a hammer pounding a stake not just into my front lawn, but into the very heart of my life. The noise was a brutal punctuation mark in the gentle symphony of my Tuesday morning, the drowsy hum of bees in the lavender bushes, the soft rustle of the ancient oak Arthur and I had planted as newlyweds. I set down my watering can, my old bones screeching like rusty hinges as I straightened. My hand, wrinkled and spotted with age, flew to my chest as if to physically hold my heart in place. Through the intricate scrollwork of the wrought iron gate, a barrier that had always felt like an embrace, I saw him. A young man, anonymous in a fluorescent yellow vest, bringing his hammer down with rhythmic, unthinking force. He was defiling the pristine grass, the emerald carpet my Arthur had spent every Saturday morning for 40 years cultivating. The sign he was erecting was a slash of violent red against the peaceful green. The letters were stark, white, and big enough to read from my porch. For sale. My heart didn't just drop. It felt as though it had been gouged from my chest, tossed onto the zoysia grass, and was now being tenderized by that young man's hammer. I marched down the flagstone path, each step a tremor of fury. My hand trembled so violently I could barely work the familiar latch on the gate. "What in God's name do you think you're doing?" My voice was a thin, reedy thing, a pale ghost of the outrage roaring inside me. The young man barely spared me a glance. "Got a work order to put up the sign, ma'am." His tone was flat, bored. "Just another job." "There is no work order," I insisted, my voice gaining a raw edge. "This house is not for sale. My husband built this house. You will take that thing down this instant." He finally stopped hammering and straightened up, turning to face me. He wiped a bead of sweat from his brow with the back of his glove, and in his eyes I saw a flicker of pity. That single look, more than the hammer, more than the sign, made my blood ignite. Pity was for the weak, the confused, the helpless. "I was none of those things. I'm sorry, ma'am," he said, his voice softening into a tone one usses for a child or a lunatic. He pulled a folded, grimy paper from his back pocket. But the order came directly from the owner. A Mr. Mark Peterson. Mark. My son. The name wasn't a sound. It was a physical blow, a phantom fist that slammed into my solar plexus and stole all the air from my lungs. I gripped the cold iron of the gate, its sturdy frame the only thing keeping me upright. My gaze swung from the hateful sign to the house, my house. The house where I'd brought my baby boy, my Mark, home from the hospital, wrapped in a blue blanket Arthur had chosen. The house where I'd kissed 100 scraped knees on the very steps I now stood on. The house where, in the upstairs bedroom with the window overlooking the garden, I'd held Arthur's hand, feeling his grip loosen as he took his last, peaceful breath. My son had sold it. He had taken the repository of my life, the archive of my love, the last tangible piece of my husband, and put a price tag on it. And he hadn't said a word. Comment on which city you're watching from and subscribe to the channel, because I promise you, this is just the beginning of a story that will twist in ways you can't even imagine. My fingers felt like clumsy, foreign sausages as I fumbled with the screen of my smartphone, a gift from Mark last Christmas to keep you connected, Mom. The irony was a bitter pill in my throat. I found his name, my thumb hovering over the call button, my entire body shaking with a toxic cocktail of grief and rage. I pressed it. The phone rang once, a shrill sound in the sudden quiet of the garden. Twice. 3 times. I could picture him in his glass-walled office downtown, seeing my picture pop up, sighing, deciding whether to answer. I was about to hang up, to spare myself the indignity of his voicemail, when he finally picked up. "Mom? I'm in the middle of a meeting. Is everything okay?" His voice was rushed, impatient, the voice of a busy man interrupted by a minor inconvenience. "Is everything okay?" I repeated, my voice a strangled, incredulous whisper. The question was so absurd, so profoundly disconnected from the reality of the stake in my lawn, that I almost laughed. "I'll tell you it's not okay, Mark. There is a man on my lawn. On your father's lawn. He's hammering a for sale sign into the grass. He says you sent him." A cavernous silence opened up on the other end of the line. It was not a simple pause. It was a guilty, damning void. I could hear the faint, muffled murmur of other voices in the background, the distant clink of a coffee cup against a saucer. He was at work. He was moving papers, making decisions, living his important life, while mine was being systematically dismantled, sold off to the highest bidder. Mom, listen, he finally began, his tone shifting. It was the voice I hated, the one that dripped with condescending placation. The voice he used when he thought I was being emotional or difficult. We need to talk about this. I was going to come over tonight. To explain. Talk about what? The words tore from my throat, hot with the tears that now blurred the hideous red sign into a smear of blood against the green. That you've sold my home out from under me? That you've taken my entire life and put it on the market? What is there to talk about, Mark? How could you? After everything your father. My words were cut off. A new voice, sharp and crystalline, sliced into the call. Brenda, my daughter-in-law. Eleanor, Mark is busy. Let me handle this, she said. Her voice was a masterclass in false sweetness, a saccharine coating over a core of pure steel. Mark is just trying to do what's best for you. We've been so worried. The word worried sounded obscene coming from her lips. That house, she continued, her voice losing its feigned warmth and taking on a practical, lecturing tone, is far too much for you to handle alone. It's a money pit, Eleanor. The roof, the plumbing. It's a constant drain. We found a lovely senior living facility for you, just a few miles from us. It's brand new. You'll have friends your own age. They have activities. Bingo night. A facility. A room. A single, sterile room in a building full of dying people, with scheduled activities to distract us from the fact that our families had disposed of us. They weren't just selling my house. They were packaging me up, putting a label on me, old, inconvenient, and shipping me off. The cold, calculated cruelty of it, the sheer audacity of her bingo night, stole my breath. You have no right, I managed to rasp my throat tight. This is my house. Arthur left it to me. Actually, Brenda's voice was like a shard of ice now, all pretense of kindness shattered. Mark has power of attorney. We checked with our lawyer. We do have the right. Honestly, Eleanor, it's for your own good. You're just being stubborn. You'll thank us one day. You'll see. The line went dead. I stood frozen on the path, the phone still pressed to my ear, listening to the mocking silence. Power of attorney. The phrase echoed in the hollow space where my heart had been. I vaguely, through a thick fog of grief, remembered signing some papers after Arthur died. I was a zombie then, numb and lost, moving through a world that had lost all its color. Mark had sat beside me at the kitchen table, his hand on mine. It's just in case, Mom, he'd said, his voice gentle. To help with the bills, to make sure everything is taken care of if you ever need me to step in. I had trusted him. I had trusted my only son, the boy I had raised to be an honorable man like his father. Now, that trust felt like the most profound and foolish mistake of my long life. The house wasn't just wood and nails and a leaky roof. It was the last piece of Arthur I had left. It was my armor against the world, and they were ripping it off my back. I spent the rest of that day as a ghost in my own home, a phantom haunting the rooms of a life that was no longer mine. I wandered from room to room, my hand trailing along the surfaces, trying to absorb the memories through my fingertips. I ran my palm over the worn, plush velvet of Arthur's favorite armchair, the one with the permanent, comfortable indent from the thousands of evenings he sat there, reading the paper, his feet propped up on the ottoman. I traced the faint pencil marks on the kitchen doorframe, a ladder of our son's growth. Mark, age 5. Mark, age 10. Mark, age 16, the highest mark where he had finally towered over me, a lanky, awkward teenager full of impossible dreams. Each object, each scuff on the hardwood floor, each faded patch on the wallpaper screamed a memory, a story. This was not a money pit, it was the living archive of my entire existence. How could he do this? The question was a relentless, pounding drumbeat in my skull, a rhythm of pain and betrayal. Mark had always been a good son. A bit distant, perhaps, since he married Brenda 10 years ago. She was a woman who measured the world in square footage and stock portfolios. Her eyes were always calculating, assessing the value of things, not their worth. She'd complained for years that the house was dated, that I was sitting on a gold mine, that I should sell it and unlock the equity to travel, or, her favorite phrase, simplify your life. I had always laughed it off, a harmless absurdity. It was just Brenda being Brenda. I never, not for a single, solitary moment, believed that Mark, Arthur's son, would ever be swayed by her cold arithmetic. That evening, just as the sun began to bleed across the horizon, his sleek, dark sedan pulled into the driveway. My stomach twisted into a tight, bitter knot of dread. He got out of the car, but he didn't come to the front door. He walked over to the for sale sign. He reached out and straightened it, nudging it a few inches to the left as if it were a picture hanging crookedly on a wall. The casualness of the act, the simple, proprietary gesture, was a fresh dagger in my heart. Then Brenda got out of the passenger side, her arms crossed over her chest, her face a mask of grim, righteous determination. This was an execution, and they were the impeccably dressed executioners. I met them at the door. I didn't open it all the way, just a few inches, leaving the heavy brass security chain engaged. It was a flimsy defense, I knew, but it was mine. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice flat and cold. Mark had the decency to look ashamed. His eyes, so like his father's, were red-rimmed and evasive. "Mom, please. Let us in. We need to explain. This isn't what it looks like, isn't it?" I looked past him to Brenda, whose expression was a mixture of impatience and exasperation. "Explain what? How you've colluded behind my back and decided I'm incompetent? Or was this your brilliant idea, Brenda? Did you finally manage to convince him that his mother's memories are less valuable than the commission on this old house?" Brenda stepped forward, her heels clicking sharply on the porch. "Eleanor, this is not about greed. It's about practicality. Your property taxes went up 8% last year. The roof needs to be completely replaced. That's a $20,000 job. You can't even climb a stepladder to change a light bulb without us worrying you'll fall and break a hip. We are worried about you. You're worried about me?" I let out a harsh, broken laugh that sounded like tearing fabric. "You haven't called me in 3 weeks, Brenda. You forgot my birthday last month. The two of you sent a generic flower arrangement 2 days late. Don't you dare stand there on my doorstep and pretend you're worried about me. You're worried about your inheritance. You're worried about your burden." Mark flinched as if I'd struck him. "Mom, that's not fair." "Fair?" I spat the word, my voice rising with a terrible, righteous fury. "You want to talk about fair? Let's talk about your father. He poured his heart, his soul, and what little money he had after the war into this place. He built that back deck with his own 2 hands, board by board. He swore to me, on this very porch, that I would live and die in this house. And you, his only son, the boy he taught about honor and promises, you are breaking that promise." His face crumpled. For a fleeting second, I saw the little boy I remembered, the one who would burst into tears if he thought he had disappointed me. But then Brenda, ever the pragmatist, put a firm hand on his arm, a silent command to hold his ground. His expression hardened again, the brief flicker of remorse extinguished. "Dad's gone, Mom," he said, his voice low and strained. "We have to be realistic. We have to think about the future. Get off my property," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerously quiet level that silenced them both. "Both of you. Don't you dare come back until you've taken that obscene sign down." I slammed the heavy oak door in their faces, the security chain rattling like a death cry. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood, my entire body trembling with a rage so profound, so absolute, it terrified me. This wasn't just about a house anymore. This was a war for my life, for my dignity. And I had no intention of surrendering. The next few days were a special kind of hell, a siege conducted by telephone. The real estate agent, a slick woman named Carol with a predatory smile that never reached her eyes, called to schedule viewings. I refused. "I'm not feeling well," I'd say, and hang up. She called back an hour later. "Eleanor," she said, her voice dripping with condescension, "your son has informed me that he holds power of attorney. Legally, you are obligated to allow access for scheduled showings." So I complied, but on my own terms. When the first couple arrived that Saturday, a pair of eager young newlyweds with stars in their eyes, I met them at the door wearing my rattiest, mustard-stained housecoat, my gray hair uncombed and sticking up in tufts. "Welcome," I said with a grim, conspiratorial smile. "So glad you could make it. Do try to mind the black mold in the master bathroom. It's a bit of a persistent devil. And the ghost of my late husband, Arthur, is a bit of a stickler for noise after 9 p.m. He tends to rattle chains, mostly in the attic, but sometimes he wanders. The couple exchanged a wide-eyed, nervous glance. I proceeded to give them the tour from hell. This is the dining room, I announced brightly, gesturing to the gleaming hardwood floors. The foundation here is a bit shifty, a slight tilt to the west. You might find your soup sliding to one side of the bowl during dinner. Adds a certain excitement to the meal, don't you think? I led them to the basement, which I claimed flooded, only during a light drizzle, and pointed out water stains I'd created myself with a spray bottle that morning. The attic, I informed them, was home to a family of very territorial and possibly rabid squirrels. They couldn't get out of the house fast enough, practically tripping over each other in their haste to escape to their car. Carol, the agent, was incandescent with fury. She jabbed at her phone, her perfectly manicured finger a weapon. Of course, 5 minutes later, my phone rang. "Mom, what are you doing?" Mark's voice was a furious roar. "Carol said you told the buyers the house was haunted and had rabid squirrels. Am I?" I said, my voice a symphony of feigned innocence. "I'm just being honest. It's an old house. It has its quirks. Full disclosure is important in real estate, isn't it? You are deliberately sabotaging this, and you know it. This is childish. Selling your grieving mother's home out from under her without a word of discussion is what's childish, Mark. Or perhaps monstrous is a better word." I hung up before he could muster a reply. But I knew I was only buying time. My petty acts of sabotage were amusing, but they were a flimsy dam against the tide of legal documents and my son's grim determination. I needed a weapon. I needed a fortress. My mind, exhausted and adrift, kept drifting back to Arthur. He was a man of principles, a quiet man whose word was his bond. He would have known what to do. He always knew what to do. I found myself drawn to his study, a room I had preserved as a shrine, kept exactly as he'd left it on his last good day. His leather-bound history books lined the shelves, their spines cracked with use. His silver fountain pen sat next to a half-finished crossword puzzle on the mahogany desk. His presence was so strong in here it was almost a physical weight, a comforting pressure on my shoulders. My eyes fell upon the old, olive-drab metal footlocker tucked under his desk. It was his army trunk. He'd brought it home from Korea, and it had sat in that exact spot for over 50 years, a silent, green sentinel. When I was a young bride, full of curiosity, I'd asked him what was inside. "Just some old memories, Elle," he'd said, his smile not quite reaching his kind eyes. "Dust and ghosts. Best to leave them be," he'd said it lightly, but there was an undercurrent of steel in his voice, a quiet but absolute boundary, and I never asked again. Now I knelt before it, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Dust and ghosts were exactly what I needed. The trunk was secured with a small, tarnished brass padlock. I had no key. For a long moment, I hesitated. This felt like a profound violation, a betrayal of his trust, of the one secret he had ever kept from me. But then I thought of Mark and Brenda, of their calculated cruelty and the hateful sign on my lawn. What was this small, desperate betrayal compared to the one being perpetrated against me? Arthur would understand. He was a fighter. He would want me to fight. I went to the garage, my movements stiff and resolute, and returned with a crowbar. It felt heavy and alien in my hands, a tool of destruction. With a deep breath and a silent apology that caught in my throat, I wedged the flattened tip into the clasp and pushed with all my strength. The metal groaned and screeched in protest, a terrible, wrenching sound that seemed to echo through the silent house. Finally, with a loud, violent crack, the lock broke. My hands were shaking as I lifted the heavy lid. The air that rose from the trunk was a time capsule of scents: old paper, dry camphor, wool, and something else. Something faint and metallic, like old sorrow. On top lay his neatly folded dress uniform, the green wool still coarse and sturdy. Beneath it were his medals, nestled in a velvet-lined box, tarnished with age. A bronze star and a purple heart. My eyes filled with hot tears. He so rarely spoke of the war, of the things he'd seen and done, the friends he'd lost. I carefully lifted the uniform out, its weight a solemn reminder of the young man he had been. Underneath were bundles of letters, tied with faded red ribbon. Most were the letters I had sent him, my youthful, looping script full of naive love and hopeful plans for our future. But there was another stack, a thick one, tied with simple, rough twine. The handwriting on these envelopes was not mine. It was a strong, masculine script, the letters bold and clear. I untied the twine, my fingers fumbling. I opened the top letter. Arthur. It began. The date was 1953. I don't know how to write this. I don't know how to thank you. You pulled me out of that hellhole when everyone else was running the other way. You threw me over your shoulder and carried me through fire. You saved my life. I owe you everything. I swear on my mother's grave. If you or your family ever need anything at all, I will be there. No questions asked. Your brother in arms, Joseph Kowalski. I sat back on my heels, the brittle paper trembling in my hand. Joseph Kowalski. The name rang a faint, distant bell. Arthur had mentioned him a few times over the years, always with a deep, quiet reverence. The best man I ever knew, he'd called him once. After 2 glasses of whiskey on their old platoon's reunion night, bravest fella I ever met, came from nothing and had a heart bigger than Chicago. I dug through the letters, a correspondence that spanned decades. They painted a picture of a deep, life-altering friendship forged in the crucible of war and sustained by unwavering loyalty. Joseph had been an orphan from the rough and tumble south side of Chicago. Arthur, whose family had a modest but comfortable hardware business, had helped him get on his feet after the war, co-signing a loan for a small auto repair shop. But it was clear from Joseph's humble, grateful words that the debt he felt he owed was not financial. It was a soul debt, a debt of life. Then, at the very bottom of the trunk, tucked beneath the last bundle of letters, I found it. It wasn't another letter. It was a thick, legal-looking document folded into a small, tight square. The paper was yellowed and brittle, the folds permanently creased. I carefully unfolded it, my breath held tight in my chest. It was a private contract, drawn up by a lawyer, the letterhead reading, Abbott and Hayes, attorneys at law. It was dated October 12, 1955, the year Arthur bought this plot of land. My eyes, blurry with tears, scanned the dense, typewritten paragraphs, my mind struggling to comprehend the impenetrable legal jargon. It was a private agreement between 2 parties, Arthur Peterson and Joseph Kowalski. It stated in stark, unambiguous terms that while the house at 214 Elm Street was to be legally titled to Arthur Peterson, it was held in a private, moral trust. It was a promise, notarized and witnessed by 2 names I didn't recognize. A safety net woven from honor. The contract stipulated that in the event that Joseph Kowalski or his direct, bloodline descendants ever faced catastrophic and life-altering hardship, including but not limited to financial ruin or severe medical crisis, full ownership of the property at 214 Elm Street would be transferred to them for the symbolic sum of $1. It was a debt of honor, codified on paper, hidden from the world. I sat there on the floor of my husband's study for what felt like an eternity, the world tilting and groaning on its axis. This house that I considered the very core of my being, the bedrock of my identity. It wasn't entirely mine. It never had been. It belonged, in spirit, to a promise my husband had made to a friend before he ever put a ring on my finger. A promise heavier than stone, as he used to say about the things that truly mattered. A strange, electrifying calm washed over me, displacing the helpless rage. The fury I felt towards Mark began to curdle, to transform into something else, something I couldn't yet name. It was a profound and unsettling confusion. I looked at the contract again. Joseph Kowalski. The name echoed in my mind, no longer faint, but a thunderclap. It held a power I was only just beginning to understand. This wasn't just a piece of paper. It was my ammunition. It was my sword and my shield. Subscribe now if you're on the edge of your seat. You won't believe how this contract changes everything. The next viewing was scheduled for Saturday at 2 p.m. I knew this one was different. Carol, the agent, had called me herself, her voice tight with the kind of forced patience a zookeeper usses on a particularly stubborn chimpanzee. Eleanor, she'd said, this is a cash offer, well over your asking price. They're not asking for any contingencies. Your son has already indicated he intends to accept it. Please, I am begging you, just be pleasant for 1 hour. I'd smiled into the phone. Of course, Carol, I'd said, my voice as sweet as honey. Don't you worry. I'll even bake cookies. When Mark and Brenda's car pulled up at 1:30, I was in the kitchen, pulling a tray of perfectly brown chocolate chip cookies from the oven. The warm, comforting scent of melting chocolate and vanilla filled the house, a fragrant lie that was completely at odds with the glacial storm brewing inside me. Brenda entered first, her sharp eyes taking in the scene. She looked surprised and immediately suspicious. "What's all this?" "Just being pleasant," I said, offering a serene smile as I carefully transferred the cookies to a wire cooling rack, making the house feel homey. "Isn't that what a good seller is supposed to do?" Mark wouldn't meet my eyes. He lingered in the doorway to the living room, his expensive suit looking rumpled, his shoulders slumped. He looked like a man being led to his own hanging. "Mom," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "these people are. They're the ones. It's going to happen today." "I know, dear," I said, my voice unnaturally calm, unnervingly cheerful. "Don't you worry about a thing." The doorbell rang precisely at 2. I wiped my hands on my apron, the one Mark had given me for Mother's Day years ago, and went to answer it. A young couple stood on the porch holding hands. They looked kind. They looked tired. The woman had a gentle face and anxious eyes. The man stood protectively beside her. When the woman introduced herself and her husband, my heart didn't just jolt. It stopped dead for a second, then started again with a painful thud. It was a common name. It could have been anyone, but still. I gave them the grand tour, the real one this time. I was magnificent. I showed them the sunny breakfast nook where Arthur and I drank our coffee every morning for 50 years, watching the cardinals at the feeder. I pointed out the sturdy lower branches of the old oak tree in the backyard, perfect for a tire swing. I told them how the afternoon sun streamed into the living room, making the whole space glow like amber. I wasn't just showing a house. I was selling a dream. I was selling my dream. I watched as they fell deeply, irrevocably in love with it, their faces lighting up with visions of their own future, their own children's height being marked on the kitchen doorframe. Brenda and Carol were beaming, exchanging triumphant glances behind my back. Mark just looked sick, his face pale and clammy. After they left, gushing about making an official offer within the hour, Carol couldn't contain her glee. "They're going to sign tonight. The offer is firm. Congratulations, Eleanor, you're about to be a very wealthy woman. You can have the best room at the facility." "That's wonderful," I said, my serene smile never wavering. Once Carol's car had sped away, the three of us were left in the living room. The silence was thick and heavy, charged with all the unspoken betrayals and simmering resentments. "Well," Brenda said, breaking the quiet with a sharp, triumphant sigh, "it's finally done. I'll come by tomorrow with some boxes to start packing up your things. We'll only take the essentials to the facility, of course. The rest can go into storage." I turned my full attention to my son, who was staring at a spot on the Persian rug, refusing to look at me. My smile finally faded, replaced by an expression of cold, quiet gravity. "I have a question for you, Mark," I said, my voice perfectly level. He finally looked up, his eyes wary. "What?" "The buyers. The lovely young couple who are buying my home." "What is their name?" Brenda scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. "What on earth does that matter? Their name is Miller. They're a lovely family with a solid financial portfolio. Now about the packing." "Miller," I repeated softly, letting the name hang in the air. I walked over to Arthur's mahogany desk, my movements slow and deliberate, a queen on a chessboard. I reached into the top drawer and pulled out the yellowed, folded contract I had found in the trunk. I walked back and laid it gently on the coffee table between us. "That's funny," I said, my voice beginning to tremble, not with weakness, but with a rising tide of seismic power. "Because the name on this contract, the one that truly matters, is Kowalski. Joseph Kowalski." Mark's face, already pale, turned the color of bone. He stared at the ancient document as if it were a coiled rattlesnake. He looked like he was going to vomit. Brenda leaned forward, squinting at the paper. "What is that old thing? Some sentimental nonsense of your father's?" "This," I said, my gaze locked on my son's terrified, shattered eyes, "is your grandfather's honor made manifest on paper. It's a promise he made to the man who saved his life in a frozen hell half a world away. A promise that this house, this very ground we are standing on, would be a safe harbor for that man's family if they ever needed it." I let the words sink into the suffocating silence. Brenda looked utterly bewildered, her eyes darting back and forth between me and her speechless, imploding husband. Then I delivered the final, devastating blow. I reached back into the desk drawer and pulled out another piece of paper. This one was newer, a crisp sheet of printer paper. It was a letter printed from an email that I had also found tucked away in Arthur's files, not in the locked trunk, but in a file Mark must have accessed. A letter addressed to him. I did some more digging after I found the contract. Mark, I said, my voice dangerously quiet. It's amazing what you can find online these days when you know what you're looking for. I found your recent correspondence with a woman named Sarah. I paused, letting the name hang in the air like a guillotine. Joseph Kowalski's granddaughter. A single mother who now goes by her married name. Sarah Miller. The sound that escaped Mark's throat was not a word, but a choked, desperate, animal sob. He collapsed into Arthur's armchair as if his bones had turned to water, burying his face in his hands, his entire body shaking with violent, uncontrollable tremors. The carefully constructed wall of lies and practicality he had built around himself didn't just crumble, it exploded into dust. Brenda stared at her husband, her mouth agape, her face a mask of horrified confusion. Mark? What is she talking about? What in God's name is going on? Mark couldn't speak, so I did. My voice was steady now, all the anger scoured out of it, leaving only a vast, aching sadness. He found the contract a few months ago, didn't you, Mark? In your father's files. You found your father's promise. And then you found her. You found Sarah Miller. You found out that her little boy, your father's best friend's great-grandson, is sick. Very, very sick. Mark looked up, his face a mess of tears and devastation. He has a rare genetic disorder, he whispered, his voice cracking, broken. They need millions for an experimental treatment in Switzerland. It's his only chance. They'd sold their own house, cashed in their retirement, everything. It wasn't enough. Sarah, she would never have asked. She's too proud. But I knew. I read Dad's letters. I saw the contract. I knew what Dad would have done. He would have given it all. He took a ragged, shuddering breath. I couldn't tell you, Mom. I know you. I know your heart. You would have sold this place in a second, given them every last penny, and left yourself with nothing. You'd move into some tiny, rundown apartment and eat cat food just to honor Dad's promise. I couldn't let you do that. I thought if I handled it, if I forced the sale and put you somewhere safe and secure first, I could control it. I could give them the money from the sale and make sure you were taken care of. I was trying to protect you. From yourself. His words hung in the air, rearranging the entire world, twisting the narrative from a story of greed into a tragedy of misguided love. This wasn't about disrespect. It was about the crushing weight of a legacy. He was trying to honor his father's sacred debt while protecting his mother from her own boundless generosity, and in the process, he had shattered her heart. Brenda sank onto the sofa as if her legs had given out, her face a mask of disbelief and dawning shame. You were selling the house. For them? Not for us? She whispered, looking at her husband as if for the very first time. The new car you said we could get, the vacation to Italy? They were lies, Mark choked out, tears streaming down his face, all of it. Lies to keep you from questioning it. To make it seem logical. I'm so sorry, Mom. I am so sorry. I was just so scared. I didn't know what else to do. I looked at my son, my broken, foolish, honorable son, and the white-hot fury that had sustained me for weeks simply evaporated, replaced by an overwhelming ocean of sorrow and a fierce, painful, complicated love. He had tried to carry the weight of his father's promise and his mother's well-being all by himself, and it had crushed him. He had made a terrible, cruel mistake, but he had made it for the noblest of reasons. I crossed the room and slowly, gently sat on the arm of his chair. I placed my hand on his heaving shoulder. Oh, my dear boy, I said, my own tears finally falling, hot and cleansing. You foolish, foolish boy. You should have told me. You should have trusted me. We are a family. We carry these burdens together. The days that followed were quiet and strange. The for sale sign came down, not because the sale was off, but because it was no longer a commercial transaction. It was the fulfillment of a promise made half a century ago. The toxic anger between us was replaced by a fragile, tentative honesty. Brenda was humbled, looking at her husband and her mother-in-law with new, respectful eyes. She had seen a depth of character in the two people she thought she knew so well, a legacy of honor that dwarfed her balance sheets. I did not go to a facility. The day before the closing, Mark drove me to meet Sarah Miller and her son, a small, pale boy of 8 named Leo. We met in a sterile, echoing hospital cafeteria that smelled of floor polish and fear. Sarah had her grandfather's kind, weary eyes. She wept as she told me how her pride had kept her from ever breathing a word of the contract, how she felt unworthy of such a monumental, impossible gift. I took her hand, her skin cool and trembling. "Your grandfather carried my husband out of a battlefield," I told her, my voice thick with an emotion that spanned generations. "That is not a debt that can be measured in dollars or square feet. This house was never just wood and stone. It was a promise. And today, our family is keeping it." The sale went through. Mark, Brenda, and I sat at a lawyer's table and signed the papers, transferring the deed of 214 Elm Street to Sarah Miller for the symbolic sum of $1, as the contract stipulated. The rest of the money, the full market value that the Millers had been prepared to pay in cash, was placed directly into a trust for Leo's medical care. It was enough. It was more than enough. I didn't keep the house, but I didn't lose my home. In the end, I understood that the house was just a place. The home was the love, the memories, and the honor that bound us all together. I moved into a small, sunny 2-bedroom apartment a few blocks away from the hospital where Leo was being treated. Brenda, in a gesture that spoke more than 1,000 apologies, spent a week helping me pack, handling my precious, memory-laden belongings with a newfound, gentle reverence. My last time at 214 Elm Street was to give the keys to Sarah. Leo was with her, a little stronger, a little more color in his cheeks after his first round of treatment. He immediately ran into the backyard to gaze up at the magnificent old oak tree. "My grandpa used to tell me stories about a man named Arthur Peterson," Sarah said, her eyes shining with unshed tears as she looked around the living room. "He said he was the best man he ever knew." "He was?" I said, a true, peaceful smile spreading across my face. "He would be so happy to see you here." I watched Leo through the large picture window, a little boy with a future, playing in the deep shade of a tree planted by a man he'd never met, in a yard secured by a promise made long before he was born. The house was no longer mine, but its legacy was. The love Arthur had poured into its very foundation had not disappeared. It had simply been transferred, a living gift from one generation to the next. And in that moment, I felt him there with me, not as a rattling ghost in a hallway, but as a warm, living presence, his promise fulfilled, his honor intact. I had lost a house, but in doing so, I had found the true, unbreakable meaning of home. Comment which part of this story left you the most speechless. Thank you for watching.